HP Lion Pride PT6. Draco Malfoy had suffered the company of his friends through most of the journey to Hogwarts. Crabbe and Goyle both sat across from him, going on and on about their summer holidays. They had done nothing, really. Worked on their muscles, and talked about which girls they planned on shagging when school started again. Pansy Parkinson had sat next to him, holding his hand, and smiling flirtatiously at him, as if they had just begun dating. Draco allowed her to cling to him, as he didn't wish to argue that she was nothing more to him than a means to relieve his tensions. He just couldn't spare the energy it would take to argue against the girl. Theodore Knott sat on Pansy's other side, and was strangely quiet throughout the trip. Knott usually was the most vocal about what he wanted to accomplish in the coming year. Draco didn't really pay it any mind, however, as his own head was filled with plans. He had two jobs to do. One was to repair the vanishing cabinet he knew to be resting in the room of lost items, as his master had called it. The second was to kill the supposed greatest wizard to ever lived, Albus Dumbledore. It was that task that was giving him such a headache. For every idea he thought of, he managed to find a way that Dumbledore might prevent it from working. He'd read everything in the Malfoy family library, and now had a very extensive knowledge of poisons and curses. He had several backup plans that would use that knowledge, but he was hoping for a bit of inspiration. Something grand. Something that would show the whole world just how powerful and cunning he was. Just when it started to get dark, Draco found an excuse to break away from these sycophants and went to the bathroom to change into his robes. Two things kept repeating themselves in his mind's eye. The first was the very dire warning he had received from his master about failing. He had watched the Dark Lord torture some muggle that his followers had brought before him. The muggle had writhed and screamed under the cruciatus curse, until it began ripping flesh from its face. The act of self-decimation had excited the Dark Lord, and he had intensified the curse. When it was all over, the muggle had died from blood loss. It had eventually ripped its own eyes out, and chewed off its own tongue. It had been horrible, didn't even begin to describe it. Yet, Draco had not felt the warning or the show had been necessary at all. He would succeed, if only to claim the rewards he'd been promised. He'd seen Daphne Greengrass speaking with her family on the train platform. She looked even better than she had the previous year, and it had stirred him. Many nights over the summer he'd relieved himself thinking of what he would do to the pure-blood princess once he had delivered Potter to his lord. She was to be his, and would become the perfect example of pure-blood matrimony. Even as he thought of her writhing under him in ecstasy, he felt his manhood react. He thought for a moment of retrieving Pansy to help him, but decided against it almost at once. He'd made a vow to not succumb to the temptation of the flesh unless it was Daphne Greengrass herself, and besides, Pansy was, so far as he was concerned, quite used up. There was nothing more he could experience with her. Locking the door, he decided to deal with his problem. Flashes of Daphne's dark, smoldering eyes staring up at him while she worshipped him on her knees helped to fuel his need. He shut his eyes tightly, and imagined Daphne giving herself to him. Lying on a bed of green silk, her back arched and her legs open to him. He longed to hear her moans of pleasure as he entered her, to feel the warmth of her velvety womanhood surrounding him, squeezing him. "Make love to me, Draco. Make me yours," she would say. She would run her long nails down the flesh of his back as he filled her. She would wrap her legs around him, and urge him to go faster, harder. To make her scream with delight. He felt his pleasure mounting as he imagined the different positions he would take her. The many ways in which he knew he would explore her, and with one final image of Daphne bucking her hips against him while he drove into her from behind, Draco felt himself reach his climax. Panting, and feeling quite good after his private session, Draco clutched the sink. He looked in the mirror and smiled to himself. All he saw would be it was fate. All he had to do was kill that old fool, Dumbledore. Everything else would fall into place after that. Quickly, he cleaned himself, and adjusted his new robes to make himself presentable. He gave himself one final look of pride as he turned to leave when the second image that had been haunting him flashed in his mind. His mother, staring at him as he boarded the train. He'd seen her giving him the same look all summer, ever since he'd taken the mark. But that morning, she looked as if she thought she would never again see him. As if he were boarding a train that led to his death. For most of the summer, he'd believed her look to be nothing less than disappointment, but that morning, as he gave one final wave, he understood that he had been partially correct. He had thought that she believed he would fail, but not because he was weak. She thought he would fail because he was given such an impossible task, and he would die at the Dark Lord's hand. Draco tried to shake the sudden rush of fear that washed over him. He knew that he was the only thing his mother cared about. His parents had decidedly different ideas on how to raise him. While his mother had been caring and nurturing, his father had been a strict taskmaster, and had always kept his son at a distance. The only times his father had ever done anything for his son had been because it served him in some way. But his mother had always been there, with support and understanding. Draco now felt suddenly guilty in how he had always treated her. Much like his father, he had been aloof, and abhorrent of her affections. Yet, she had never stopped being there for him. His mother had never lost faith in her son, and had done all she could to try and dissuade him from his vengeance for the insults he had suffered during the previous year. And then, after he had defied her wishes and taken the mark, she had barely spoken to him during the rest of the summer, though she was always there, worrying for his safety. She was wrong to worry. He was not going to fail. He was not going to die. He would be rewarded above all others, and he would get what was rightfully his. Draco unlocked the bathroom door and stepped into the corridor, just as Harry Potter was coming his way. Potter stopped, and Draco had looked the chosen one in the eye, sizing him up. Potter stared right back. It was hard at first not to throw insults, or even hex, his rival, but he fought down the urge. The time would come, and Potter would know once and for all who the superior wizard was. After Draco had stripped Potter of everything he held dear, Potter would know. And then, the Dark Lord would end his life. Draco gave a little smirk, and then made his way past the golden boy, pushing him with his shoulder as he passed. He didn't even spare a glance as he made his way back to his friends. When the train finally stopped and he and the rest of his Slytherin circle, all Draco could think was how great the year promised to be. Daphne sat alone at the Slytherin table, as her best friend had yet to appear. Daphne was actually starting to worry about Tracy as the Great Hall began filling with students. She saw Draco Malfoy followed by his loyal cronies pass her, with little more than a quick glance at her. He wasn't strutting or posturing as he usually did, but he strode with purpose, and pride. She remembered Harry and Neville mention encountering the so-called Slytherin prince on the train and how he hadn't tried to insult them, or hex them. In fact, he'd acted as if Harry wasn't worth his time. It was so out of character for a boy who'd taken every opportunity to impress upon people he felt were beneath him how superior he felt he was. Odd, she thought. Even more strange to her was the strange way the Slytherin table was filling up. Never before had she seen her housemates shooting such looks at one another. People whom she believed to be close friends the year before were now sitting on opposite sides of the table, not speaking, and looking ready to start dueling. Had something happened to divide the one house of Hogwarts that had essentially always been unified? "Hi, Daphne." Daphne looked up and gave a half-hearted wave, and then did a double take. "Millie." Millicent Bulstrode was now sitting down across from her dorm mate, and Daphne was in shock. Millie was easily one of the bigger girls in the entirety of the school. She was always taller and broader than any of the others, and had a reputation for being somewhat of a brute. However, Daphne knew that she was a very gentle person, and quite good-natured. They had become friends in the previous year, and helped her break away from the poor influence of Pansy Parkinson. Millicent looked very different from the previous year. She had lost quite a bit of weight, as well as having had her hair done, and makeup on her face. While she would never be a model, she was quite pretty now. Daphne was speechless looking at her dorm mate. "Wow, look at you." Daphne smiled. Millie smiled gratefully. "Thank you. I've never felt better in my life. It's really amazing what a diet and a bit of exercise will do for you." "Why the change?" Daphne asked curiously. "Well, after everything we went through last year, with the and all, and how I actually made some real friends, I was feeling pretty good about myself, except for how I looked. When I got home, I asked my mum to help me figure out a diet and stuff. She's a Mediwitch, you know, and she and my aunt helped me keep with it all summer. While we were in Bulgaria visiting family, I got a makeover with my cousin, and now..." She waved her hands in front of herself, showing off the results. "Well, I'm truly happy for you. I'm completely gobsmacked by how good you look." "Thanks. You look good, too. It looks like you got a lot of sun and stuff." Millie complimented. "Yeah. I was at the beach most of the summer," Daphne admitted, looking at the doors. "Where's Tracy?" Millie asked, following Daphne's gaze. Daphne shrugged. She kind of had a big crush on Blaise Zabani all summer, and when she saw him on the train, she acted on it. "I haven't seen her since." "I haven't seen Blaise, either," Millie said. "I guess that explains it." "There she is." Daphne smiled, spotting her best friend coming towards them and taking a seat next to Daphne. Her silky blonde hair looked quite disheveled, and she didn't meet Daphne's eyes as she took her seat and tried to smooth her hair down. Daphne also noticed that she didn't look happy at all. In fact, she looked upset. "Are you okay?" Daphne asked, but Tracy simply nodded and remained silent. Daphne realized that whatever it was, Tracy was not about to start talking about it in the Great Hall. Blaise walked past at that moment, and Tracy's eyes darkened ever so slightly. Daphne didn't miss the look, and knew that things must not have gone as well as Tracy had hoped. Millicent didn't remark on the sudden awkwardness, and the three girls sat in silence until the first years were escorted in and the sorting ceremony began. During the ceremony, Daphne noticed that Tracy didn't applaud for any of the new Slytherins. She also noticed that other Slytherins withheld their applause as certain first years were sorted into their house. When the sorting had finished, and the golden plates filled with food, Daphne and Millicent both began to fill their dishes, while Tracy only took a small roll, and began slowly picking it apart. Nibbling on the pieces. Daphne sighed heavily as she saw how hard Tracy was trying to keep herself together. "Do you want to go to the common room?" she whispered, but Tracy shook her head. "Later," Tracy whispered. Daphne nodded, and went back to her meal, feeling her concern swelling. "So, where were you all summer?" Millicent asked, trying to find something to talk about. "We were on this little island. It was so nice," Daphne said, turning back to the tall girl. "Did you see Harry?" "Almost all summer." Daphne smiled. "He tried to dump me at Ron's funeral, but I went to see him and made him realize his mistake." "Why the hell would he try and dump you?" Millicent asked in shock. "You two always look so happy." "We are," Daphne confirmed. He was feeling really guilty about what happened. "What did happen?" Millicent asked, leaning forward and lowering her voice. I'm not allowed to talk about it," Daphne said, looking up and down the table. "None of us are." "I won't be the only one to ask," Mill said. "There have been rumors all summer. You know the papers are calling him the chosen one? They're convinced he's going to be the one to finish you-know-who. Last year, they were saying he'd gone round the twist. More proof that you can't put any stock in anything they report." Daphne sighed. "He looks a lot better than I remember ever seeing him look at the start of the year. He always looked half-starved or something," Millicent remarked, looking over her shoulder and across the great hall. "We did a lot of working out," Daphne said, and Millicent turned and gave a lecherous grin. "Exactly what kind of exercise?" Millie asked, arching her eyebrow. Tracy snorted into her juice, and Daphne felt herself blushing. "Have you been talking with my sister?" Daphne hissed, again looking to see if anyone else was listening to their conversation. Her face was quickly starting to glow red, while Tracy was wiping juice off her face with a napkin. "No, why?" Millie asked, looking down the table, to see Astoria Greengrass talking animatedly with her friends. "Because she kept hounding me for details on my sex life. Like I'd ever tell her anything that happens between me and Harry," Daphne hissed angrily. "Not that anything did, right?" Tracy commented softly, not looking up. "Wait, you're saying you were with him all summer, and nothing happened?" Millie looked truly surprised. "Yes. Nothing happened. Not that we didn't want to do anything, but we just couldn't," Daphne admitted, feeling even more humiliated. Millie looked to Tracy, who nodded to confirm Daphne's statement. "Oh, you poor, deprived, frustrated girl." Millie looked sadly. "I thought for sure you and Harry would be shagging all summer. God, I even managed to get a bit of action while I was in Bulgaria." "Ah." Daphne sighed, shoving her plate away, and dropping her head to the table. The last thing she wanted to hear was that Millicent Bulstrode, who could have been related to gorillas, if you believed the awful things people said behind her back, had managed to become intimate with a boy she barely knew, while she, Daphne, who'd been dating a boy for nearly a year now, had only gotten a nice rub-down, once. "Maybe he's gay." Millie shrugged. Daphne remembered more than a few times during the summer when she had felt Harry's attraction to her press against her while they got a moment to have a good snog. No, he's definitely not gay. Daphne said, finally sitting back up. I have a theory though, and I think the headmaster is behind it. Huh? Millie looked thoroughly confused. Later, Daphne said, not wanting to discuss the subject where anyone could hear. So, tell us about your Bulgarian romance, Millie. Tracy asked, her cheerful tone sounding forced. Daphne gave a look of gratitude to her friend, who still would no look her in the eye. Daphne wanted the feast to end so she could find out what was wrong. Harry and his Gryffindor friends were thoroughly enjoying their meal as well as catching up with one another. As always, the food was simply delicious, and after a sumptuous feast, Harry had 3 helpings of his favorite treacle tart. As the plates cleared, Dumbledore stood to make the usual start of term announcements. The great hall fell silent as every head turned to watch the headmaster, as he strode to the podium to address them all. It is very good to meet all of our new students, and even better to see all of our returning students, he said, a soft smile on his weathered face. I would like to introduce Professor Horace Slughorn, who will be teaching potions, as Professor Severus Snape has been asked to fill the position as defense against the dark arts teacher. There was a lot of murmuring, and an explosion of applause from the Slytherin table. Only Daphne and Tracy remained quiet, as they had already had a bit of his teaching style during the summer. As always, I must warn that the Forbidden Forest is just that, forbidden to all students. Our caretaker, Mr. Filch, has asked me to tell you all that there is a blanket ban on any product from Weasley Wizard Wheezes. For the full list of banned items, please refer to the list posted outside Mr. Filch's office. Tryouts for the house Quidditch teams will be posted on your common room notice boards. If you have any questions, please see your head of house. Now, if I may have just a few more minutes of your time, I would like to impress upon you the serious situation we find ourselves in this year. As you are all aware, an organization calling themselves the Death Eaters have once again risen up to grip our society in fear. It is our duty to resist them, for freedom is our right. I would ask that you report any activity that you find suspicious, or even outright dangerous to others, immediately. All reports will remain anonymous, and be investigated immediately. Now, to bed. The students rose almost as one, and Harry and Neville began to flow with the current. Harry smiled at Hermione and Dean Thomas, who'd replaced Ron as the 6th-year prefect, as they helped the 5th-year prefects herd the 1st-year students towards the common room. Mr. Potter, might I have a moment? Professor McGonagall had appeared at his side, and Harry found himself looking back towards the head table, wondering how she had moved so fast through the throng of students. Professor Dumbledore would like to see you in his office. The password is Ice Mice. Harry thanked her, relaying the message, and began making his way to the headmaster's office. He knew that Dumbledore had already planned on beginning their lessons next week, besides it was getting late, and Harry doubted that the headmaster wanted to teach him anything tonight. Ice Mice, Harry said to the gargoyle that stood guard before the headmaster's office. The stone statue stretched and yawned as it stepped aside to allow Harry entrance. Harry shook his head, still amazed by the wonder of magic, and stepped onto the rising staircase. He knocked on the door. Enter. Harry opened the door, and found Dumbledore pouring 2 cups of tea. Ah, Harry. Thank you for coming. Have a seat. Thank you, Sir Harry said politely, as he took his customary seat across from the headmaster, who was taking his own chair. May I ask what this is about, Sir. I have two requests to make of you this evening. I had planned on discussing them with you during the summer, but as you know, we were all quite busy, and sometimes, things get forgotten. Harry nodded, and sipped his tea, waiting for the headmaster to continue. Dumbledore looked very tired at the moment, and Harry felt a surge of concern for the old man. Sir, are you all right? I am quite old, and as such, no longer have the energy that I did in my youth. But I am well, thank you for your concern, Harry. Harry nodded, though his uneasiness remained. Dumbledore took a long breath before he finally began speaking, addressing the reason he had invited Harry to his office. Firstly, I do plan to start your education, just as we discussed, beginning at the end of next week. I must ask, however, that you keep what you learn to yourself. I know that you trust your friends, as do I, but anyone can be broken. Dumbledore gave Harry a meaningful look, and Harry found himself nodding. I know they will understand once you explain that it is on my request. All right, sir, if you feel it's truly that important. For now, I do. Yes. The things I plan to show you will no doubt give you an advantage in your coming trials. However, I will save that for our lessons. Now, for the true reason I asked you here tonight. Professor McGonagall has asked that you take over as captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Harry's eyes lit up, and he sat up a bit straighter. I would be honored. I thought you might. You can inform Professor McGonagall tomorrow morning. She will be most pleased, I am sure. I expect you will provide the school with thrilling matches with the team you put together. Though, I think Madame Pomfrey will be a bit distraught to learn you will be returning to the field. You have more than your fair share of sports-related injuries, if I might be so bold. Harry chuckled, as did Dumbledore. Now, I know that your schedule will be most hectic with all you are taking on, but I must ask if you would be willing to restart the Defense Association Club from last year. It seems such a shame that something so helpful be abandoned. I know that quite a few people benefited from your assistance. Hogwarts has not had so many outstandings in one subject in many, many years. Harry felt himself blush a bit at Dumbledore's compliments, and found himself nodding before thinking too much about it. Wonderful. Dumbledore smiled. It would be my pleasure to have the announcement posted on the common room notice boards. It will be up to you to set up a regular meeting schedule, and Professor Snape has consented to be the faculty advisor. Harry suddenly bristled. With all due respect, sir. Harry, I am well aware of your dislike for Professor Snape, and his distaste for you. I have tried many times over this last summer to convince him that you are not your father. Alas, he is one of the most stubborn individuals I have ever met. He clings to his hatred of your father as if it is a lifeline. It is my deepest hope that one day the two of you might find a common ground. I had hoped it would happen last year as he taught you a clemency. In the meantime, I have made it clear that he is no longer to treat you any differently than any other student. Harry rolled his eyes, as he knew very well that Snape would not abide by the headmaster's order on this occasion. However, Harry was quite used to the treatment, and so long as Snape didn't push him too far, Harry felt he could handle it for another year. Well, that is all for now. You are dismissed to get your rest. Classes begin tomorrow, and I expect you to do your very best, just as you have done all summer. Good night, Harry. Good night, Sir Harry smiled as he left. He made his way back to the common room, thinking over what Dumbledore had said. He had tried to convince Snape to treat him better, and that he'd been aware of Snape's feeling toward him. Somewhere in the back of his mind, something wasn't making sense. There was something that Dumbledore wasn't saying, but Harry felt he wanted to. He also knew it was about Snape, and that filled Harry with a very unnerving feeling. Daphne, Tracy, and Millicent had all walked down to their common room together after the feast. Daphne had hoped to kiss her boyfriend goodnight before leaving the Great Hall, but he had been stopped by Professor McGonagall, and she could not wait where she was. As the flow of students was too much, she sighed, and tried to make herself feel better with the knowledge that tomorrow she would be able to actually sit with him at meal times. When she arrived in the Slytherin common room, she had expected to find Draco holding court as he usually did. However, Draco was not to be seen. Nor were Crabbe or Goyle. Pansy and Nott were whispering together in a corner, and a few others were about, but it looked like most people had gone to bed already. Daphne and Tracy looked at each other and headed off to their dorm. Unfortunately, Millicent followed them, and Daphne knew that she was not going to find out what was bothering her best friend so badly. It was quiet as the three girls changed into their sleepwear, and prepared for bed. Daphne kept glancing at Tracy hoping her friend would open up, and tell her what had happened, but Tracy remained resolutely silent. Giving up, Daphne climbed into her bed, and closed the curtains to shut out the rest of the world. She heard Tracy climb into the bed next to hers, and a little while later, Millicent climbed into her own, and the lights went out. A few minutes later, someone opened the curtains to Daphne's bed and climbed onto the mattress with her, before closing the curtains again and casting privacy charms. Daphne sat up and saw Tracy staring back with tears in her eyes. "What is going on with you?" Daphne asked. "I'm the biggest idiot there is." Tracy fell into Daphne's arms, and began sobbing uncontrollably. Daphne was in shock, and held her best friend until she could get herself under control. Tracy shook with her sobs, and Daphne felt her heart breaking. It took a little while, but Tracy managed to calm herself. "What happened?" Daphne asked again. "I lost control. I never thought it would go that far. I mean, I dreamt about it all summer. I mean, it's all we talked about. My gods, I have never spent so much time trying to relieve myself, because all we did was imagine what it would be like." "What are you talking about?" Daphne asked, full of confusion. "I had sex with Blaze. On the train." Tracy finally confessed. "Oh." Daphne's eyes went wide. "It was a mistake. It just felt so good." "Wait. Let's take this slow," Daphne said, trying to wrap her head around what she was being told. "What exactly happened?" "Well, I saw Blaze, and I walked up to him." "Yeah, I know, I saw that. Did you even get any of your speech out?" Tracy shook her head. "The moment I saw him, and was standing so close, my brain just shut down. All I wanted to do was kiss him, so that's what I did. Then, we found a cabin, and locked it. We started to talk for a bit, and I told him that I really liked him, and he said that he knew. He said that he sensed it last year, but wasn't sure, so he didn't try anything. Then, we started snogging again, and he kept touching me, and gods, it felt like heaven. He tasted so good, and the more he touched me, the more I wanted. Tracy hiccuped, and took a few moments to compose herself again. He cast some charms to make sure we were left alone, and then things got more intense. Everything felt so good, and I just lost all control. He started taking my clothes off, and at first, I was scared, but he just kept kissing me, and my body was just humming with excitement. His hands felt so good, and he spent so much time exploring every part of my body, and it felt so good. He kept taking my clothes off, and I started taking his clothes off, and the next thing I knew, he was inside of me. Tracy collapsed into Daphne's arms again, and Daphne held her best friend tightly. She had no words for Tracy, nothing to help her. All she could do was let Tracy cry. Daphne couldn't believe that her best friend had just lost her virginity. She really couldn't believe that Tracy had had sex before she had. Tracy had only been with Blaze for a day. It was just so hard to comprehend everything she had just heard. It felt so good, and I was convinced that I was in heaven. I thought he loved me, and that's why I had let it get so far. Tracy continued. I wanted to feel loved, and important. I wanted Blaze to look at me the way Harry looks at you, or get that same goofy smile Hermione gets after she's been with Neville. I wanted it so much that I didn't think. I just let it all happen. She sobbed for a little longer before once again managing to pull herself together. When it was over, I tried to talk to him about it all. I wanted to make sure that he felt the same thing. But Tracy sniffled, and her eyes fell. He just thanked me for a good time, and said if I needed to get off again to let him know. I asked him why we couldn't be together, and he laughed. He asked if I was really ready for another go. When I explained that I wanted to be his girlfriend, he just laughed. He said his mother taught him never to be with one girl, or he could meet the same fate as his father. Daphne was now seething with rage now. Her best friend had been used by a boy she had been in love with. Blaze was all Tracy had talked about all summer, and he had taken advantage of her feelings and used her just as Malfoy had done to Pansy for years. The difference was, Tracy now understood it, and it had broken her heart. I can't believe I let him have sex with me. He didn't love me. I threw myself at him, and he just... Tracy wailed, and Daphne's heart broke more. I'm such an idiot. No, you're not an idiot. Blaze is the idiot. You just wanted what any of us want. Daphne tried. It's not your fault. I let it happen, Daph. I let him use me. Tracy groaned pitifully. No. He took advantage of you. You felt something for him, and he used it. You deserve better. But, I thought for sure. Because you spent all summer thinking he would be the perfect guy for you. You didn't really know him, nobody really does. He never talks to anyone, really, so how could you know? And I didn't help, because I was with Harry, and Hermione was with Neville. How can you spend all summer with that and not want it for yourself? Tracy nodded, and wiped at her eyes. I really did a great job of screwing everything up. Exactly how did you do that? Daphne asked with a wry look. I had this whole perfect picture in my head. I was going to start with a great boyfriend, and this was going to be such a great year. After all summer listening to you and Hermione whine about getting physical, and how randy I've been, I guess I couldn't help it when I managed to get some attention. I just never intended. I know. I know. You're not going to do yourself any good by dwelling on it, Daphne said, giving her friend a reassuring squeeze. But now you know to use your head, and not let it happen again. I think I'm done with boys. Tracy groaned, wiping her eyes, while Daphne chuckled at her declaration. No, you're not, Daphne said. You'll just do better research before you go allowing another boy to get in your knickers. You'll take your time and get to know him, and build trust before you shag him. Tracy moaned, and covered her face with her hands. I'm sorry, Daphne said softly. You're right, though. Tracy sniffled. It'll be a long time before I let anyone get that close to me. Unless you meet the right one. Don't build up a wall that no one has any hope of breaching, or you could miss out. I'm truly sorry that things went so wrong with Blaze, but that doesn't mean there isn't someone more deserving of you. You're my best friend, Tracy, and I know that you're going to do great things. I have no doubt in my mind that some guy is going to fall madly in love with you, and you'll get all the happiness you deserve. Tracy hugged Daphne tightly and thanked her. Daphne promised that she would see to it that Blaze got what he deserved for his actions, but Tracy shook her head. Just let it alone. He doesn't deserve any more attention from either of us. Daphne nodded, and sighed. Her brain was burning with questions, but she knew now was not the time to ask any of them. Tracy needed time to heal from her heartbreak, and Daphne planned to do all she could to help, because Tracy would have done it for her if the situation was reversed. They had been friends since they met 3 years before coming to Hogwarts, and Daphne couldn't imagine her life without Tracy at her side. Daphne awoke in the morning and prepared for the day. Once she and Tracy were showered and dressed, they gathered their things for classes and headed up to the Great Hall where they planned to meet Harry and the others. They were a bit surprised to find Harry already waiting for them. We're closer to the Great Hall, I thought for sure I'd be waiting for you. Daphne smiled as she got her first taste of her boyfriend. His lips felt so nice first thing in the morning. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze as she pulled away. Harry smiled. I'm so used to getting up early and exercising, that I got up at 5, and did a couple of laps around the lake. I don't want to get lazy. You could have told me last night, I would have joined you. Daphne made a face. Tracy also looked a bit put out. I wasn't alone. Millicent was out there. She kept me company. She really changed a lot over the halls. Should I be jealous? Daphne quipped, and Harry captured her lips again. No, he said simply. My heart belongs to you. Hungry? Tracy said, rather harshly, and started pushing them into the Great Hall. Harry threw a questioning glance at Daphne, but the brunette shook her head. I'll be with you in a minute, Harry said as they found a place along the Gryffindor table to sit. I need to speak with Professor McGonagall for a minute. Both girls nodded and sat down as Harry ran towards the head table. Good morning, Mr. Potter, Professor McGonagall said as Harry approached. Good morning, Professor. I just wanted to let you know that I'd be happy to take up the captaincy of the team, if you'd still like me to. Oh, wonderful. I've already been asked by several people about tryouts. I do hope you can manage to capture the cup for us this year. I will do my best, ma'am. Harry smiled. Very well. Since you are here, why don't we sort out your schedule? You did quite well on your owls, and I was very pleased with your transfiguration marks. Very pleased indeed. You did well enough in every subject to continue on your path to becoming an orator, if you still wish to pursue that it. I do, very much, but I thought I needed an outstanding in potions, I only got an A. Harry said, looking a bit confused. Yes, but we do have a new potions professor, as I'm sure you recall, and Professor Slughorn gladly accepts students into advanced potions. Oh. I didn't know. I didn't get the materials. I'm sure Professor Slughorn will be glad to lend you whatever you need until you can get yourself sorted. Here you are. Professor McGonagall handed him his timetable, and he thanked her before returning to his friends. Hermione and Neville had joined them at the Gryffindor table, and were already eating when Harry sat down. Where did you go this morning? Neville asked. You weren't in your bed when I woke up. I took a run around the lake. I thought that was just for the summer. Neville looked frightened, and began looking for any sign of Mad-Eye Moody. It was, but if you don't keep up, you get slow, and possibly fat. Harry grinned. All three girls looked at him scandalized. I am not getting fat. Daphne huffed. Tracy shook her head vehemently, and pushed away her rather full plate of food. We don't need to do it every day, Hermione said, still glaring at Harry. But it's probably a good idea to keep up with it. We don't want to lose our edge. What did Dumbledore want last night? You talked to Dumbledore? Daphne asked. Yeah. He wanted to remind me that we're starting lessons at the end of the week, and then asked if I would be captain of the Quidditch team, and head up the D this year. He wants the D to continue. Neville asked, toast halfway to his mouth. Harry shrugged. He said that everyone who was in it did really well on their owls and he'd like it to continue. He said Snape would be advising. Neville got a strange gleam in his eye at that, and Harry remembered their impromptu duel during the summer. Neville's power was growing with his confidence, and Harry was sure that one day soon, the two might have a rematch, and this time, Snape would actually have to truly defend himself. What did you say? Daphne asked. I said yes. How could I not? I think it's really important that people are able to fight back, or at the very least, defend themselves. If it's open to the entire school, there could be a lot of problems. Not everyone is at our level, Hermione said, and Daphne nodded. Maybe I can get anyone who was in it last year to help out with the new people. Harry shrugged, and Hermione smiled. That's a good idea. They began chatting idly about what they could pass on from what they had learned over the summer, while they finished their breakfast. After a bit, McGonagall came by and helped them set up their timetables for the coming term. Hermione was able to take every class she wanted, while Neville didn't quite manage the grade he needed to continue in Transfiguration. Though McGonagall did comment how impressed she was with his owl score in the subject. She then noticed that both Tracy and Daphne were looking at her expectantly. I am sorry ladies, but you will have to see Professor Snape for your schedules. I only have the results for Gryffindor students. That's all right, Professor. Tracy said, her tone still rather down. Neville and Hermione both looked to Daphne, who once again shook her head quickly. She and Tracy got up to retrieve their schedules from their head of house, who looked quite surly at their approach. Miss Greengrass, and Miss Davis," Snape said, with the barest hint of contempt for his students. Daphne remembered how he used to treat them before she and Harry had begun dating, and his treatment of them now. Though he still treated them better than people from other houses, the snide remarks and sarcastic tone were quite noticeable. "I am very pleased with your OWL scores. You both did exemplary despite the constant bad influence of your chosen compatriots," he said with a sneer. Daphne and Tracy remained quiet as he adjusted their timetables. Neither of them felt the need to rise to his insults. They simply glanced at one another, and waited for their head of house to hand them their schedules. Snape eyed them both for a long moment before he finally handed over their schedules. "A bit of caution to you both. You may have noticed a slight divide within your house. I would advise against saying or doing anything to aggravate any tempers," he said before waving them off. The girls headed back to their friends, both wearing puzzled expressions. "What was that about?" Tracy asked, looking over her shoulder at the Slytherin table. "No idea. But, it might be wise to listen to him in this instance. I did notice something very strange last night at the feast." "What do you mean?" "Just certain people glaring at each other. People who I thought were friends, or at least friendly, you know." Tracy shook her head, and Daphne sighed. "Forget it. What do you have first?" "Arithmancy." "Me too, and I'm willing to bet Hermione has it as well." "Good. I liked having a couple of classes with just us girls." "Hey." Harry smiled as Daphne sat next to him. "Hi, what's your schedule like?" "Busy today. Free period, then potions, then transfiguration. Arithmancy, potions, then free period." "I've got arithmancy too." Hermione sat up. "Are you taking runes as well?" "No. Ultimately, I'd like to write, like my mother, and I never really liked runes. I only took it so I wouldn't have to do divination." Daphne shrugged. "With how tough things are going to get, I figured I'd drop it." "Tracy?" Hermione asked hopefully. "Yeah. I've got nearly the exact same as last year, except I dropped care of magical creatures." Harry suddenly dropped his fork with a loud clatter. "Did anyone sign up for creatures?" Foreheads shook and Harry suddenly went white. "Hagrid's going be really hurt. He thinks we love that class." "What? No one likes that class," Tracy said, looking scandalized. She, like Daphne, had come to really like the half-giant professor, but his class left a lot to be desired. It was too terrifying to even consider continuing in. "Maybe I'll see if he'd like help during my free periods or something," Harry suggested. "I didn't even think." "I don't know if you'll have much time, Harry," Hermione said. "We're going to be getting loads of homework, and the classes are going to be really tough. On top of that, you've now got Quidditch, and lessons with Dumbledore." "I know, but I feel really bad." "He's my friend." "He's all of our friend, Harry," Daphne said sadly. "But, you have to admit, his class is downright frightening. I had nightmares about those Scroots for months afterwards." "I'm going to try and help him," Harry said firmly. "I owe it to him. I'll see you in potions." With that, he got up, gave Daphne a soft kiss and headed out onto the grounds. Noble to the end. Daphne sighed. Now I feel even worse. Harry marched out to the grounds and down to Hagrid's hut. The half-giant hadn't been to breakfast, so Harry hoped to catch him at his hut. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Harry knocked again, hoping that maybe Hagrid hadn't heard. Hagrid. Harry called. After a bit, Harry started to head back up to the castle when he heard a familiar bark. Out of the forest, Fang, Hagrid's enormous boarhound, came bouncing out of the wood and right towards Harry, nearly knocking him flat as he attempted to lick Harry's ears. "It's good to see you too, Fang." "Where's Hagrid?" "Good morning, Harry. What brings ya down 'ere?" "I wanted to see you. You see, I didn't take your class this year." "I'm sorry, Hagrid, but don't worry about tha," Hagrid said, giving Harry a pat on the back, nearly knocking him over. "I gathered tha your schedule might be pretty full. I know ya been trainin' all summer. I kinda figured you might not have tha much time, and I know ya don't need to take my class to be an orator." "You're not upset?" Harry asked, looking concerned. "Well, I'd be lying if I didn't tell ya I weren't sad tha I'd not be seein' ya in me class, but I understand." "Well, I'm going to have a few free periods, and I'd like to help in your classes if I can. I likely won't be able to help all the time, what with homework and all, but I think I'd like tha. When ya can, o' course. Y'all still come and visit with me, one shot?" "Definitely." Harry smiled. Hagrid beamed at him, and together they began walking back up to the castle. Hagrid told Harry that Aragog, the giant spider that he and Ron had met in their second year, was sick, and it was likely he was going to die. Harry felt bad for Hagrid, as he knew that he had raised the spider from an egg. It was one of Hagrid's oldest friends. Harry vowed to do his best to help out Hagrid, who was his oldest friend. After all, Hagrid meant a great deal to him, and if losing Ron had taught him anything, it was not to take anyone in his life for granted. Daphne, Tracy, and Hermione waited in the hall outside the potions class for Harry to join them. Neville, who was not taking potions, was presumably up in the Gryffindor common room. During their arithmancy class, Hermione, who had noticed Tracy's dark mood, had gotten the blonde Slytherin to open up about what had happened between her and her intended boyfriend. Needless to say, Hermione was scandalized and very, very angry. "I still say you should do something to him," Hermione said softly. Tracy simply shook her head. "I just want to forget it ever happened. I'm just going to focus on school, and our training." Daphne sighed. She felt horrible that her best friend was suffering. At that moment, Blaise Zabinai himself rounded the corner, and headed inside the class. "Just great." Tracy sighed, banging the back of her head on the stone wall she was leaning against. "How am I supposed to get past it if I have to look at his smug face all the time?" "You could give him really big boils on his." "Daphne." Hermione hissed, looking a bit embarrassed and at the same time, rather approving. "I'm just saying." Daphne shrugged. "I just wanted to feel how you guys feel when you're with the boys. Now, all I feel is dirty." Trace shivered. "Hey." Harry smiled as he appeared around the corner. "Hey." Daphne smiled. She understood what Tracy had been saying now. Just seeing Harry filled her with warmth, and made her light up. The way he smiled at her was like the greatest cheering charm ever. If their roles were reversed, Daphne would have been terribly jealous of Tracy for what she had. It was no wonder she had lost her inhibitions with Blaise in those moments on the train. "You okay, Tracy? You look like you just swallowed a spoonful of stink sap," Harry asked with concern. "I'll be all right, Harry, but thanks for asking," Tracy said sadly, as she led the group into the class. "Is she?" Harry began. "It's a girl thing," Daphne said, and that seemed to be enough for Harry. Daphne and Harry took a table together, while Hermione and Tracy took one right next to them. Harry dropped his bag and went to Professor Slughorn. "Professor, I'm sorry, but I didn't know until this morning that I could take this class. I didn't get anything I needed." Yes. Professor McGonagall mentioned it to me this morning. "I have a spare textbook here, until you can order one of your own, and there is plenty of ingredients in the store cupboard until you can update your kit." "Here you are," Slughorn smiled, handing over the textbook. "Off you go." Slughorn stepped to the front of the class, getting the students' attentions. "Well, as you can clearly see, I have a few potions for us to examine before we start class today. These are things you will be making over the course of the year, with a few exceptions. Let's start with this one," Slughorn said, filling a ladle and showing it to the class. Harry was unsurprised to see Hermione raise her hand. "Yes, my dear, you are." "Hermione Granger, sir, that's Veritaserum, or Truth Potion." "Very good. 5 points to Gryffindor." "Now this one, let's have someone else try you there." Harry turned, and felt his shoulders tense. Draco Malfoy was sitting with Blaise Zabini at a nearby table, his lip curled in his patented sneer as he stood to better examine the potion Slughorn was now pointing to. "Draco Malfoy. I believe it's Polyjuice Potion," Draco drawled. "Well done. 5 points to Slytherin." "Yes, a tricky potion to make, and rather time-consuming." Both Harry and Hermione gave each other a small grin. Daphne saw this and made a mental note to ask about it later. "This one should be quite easy," Slughorn began. "Amortentia," Pansy Parkinson said from behind Harry. She was sitting next to Theodore Nott, who was glaring daggers at Harry. "Very good." Slughorn grinned broadly. "Another 5 points to Slytherin." "Yes, a very strong love potion that smells distinctly different to everyone based on what that person finds attractive. Now, Amortentia does not create real love, of course, but it creates a strong attraction to whomever the maker wishes. I wonder, if any of you would be willing to take a smell, and tell the class what it is you smell." "Miss Granger." Hermione blushed a bit, but stood from her seat, and approached the cauldron and took a long inhale. Harry suddenly wished Neville were here for this, as it was almost a given that he would be blushing to his toes. Fresh turned soil, sea air, and... Hermione was blushing crimson now. "Chocolate." Shaking, Hermione quickly moved back to her seat, glaring hard at Daphne, who was trying to stifle her giggling. "What about you?" Daphne's giggle suddenly ceased, and she felt herself getting warm. "Come on, don't be shy." Slughorn chuckled, waving her up to the front. Daphne stood, and she glanced quickly at Harry, who looked mortified as he watched her step closer to the love potion. Daphne, keeping her eyes on Harry, took a small sniff, and then another, and then, closing her eyes, took a long sniff of the very pleasant fragrance. "I smell soap, and broom polish." Daphne inhaled again. "And, fresh baked treacle tart." Harry's head hit the table with a thud, and Daphne came back to reality. There were quite a few sniggers, and a wolf whistle or two. "Settle down, settle down," Slughorn called, a broad smile on his face. "Let's have a gent, shall we? Mr. Malfoy, would you care to?" "Not really, no," Draco said, his eyes darting to Daphne, and then back to Slughorn. "Oh, come now, Mr. Malfoy, it's only a bit of fun." Draco shook his head quickly, and Slughorn sighed. "Mr. Potter, how about you?" Harry was about to decline as well, but a longing look from Daphne made him change his mind. He knew she must be curious about how she smelled to him, and since she had done it, it only seemed fair. "I smell vanilla, and peaches." Harry smiled, smelling a bit more of the love potion, and feeling a bit loopy and stupid. "Suntan lotion." Daphne's face could have lit up all of London at that moment. More catcalls came from the other students, and Harry sat back down feeling a little out of sorts. Both Hermione and Tracy were having great difficulty in keeping from laughing. "Sir?" Ernie Macmillan asked, getting the class to calm a bit. "What's that one?" Ernie was pointing to a small vial of very bright gold liquid. Slughorn's eyes lit up at once as he went over to the vial and took it out of its holder. "This," he said, holding it up so all the students could see, "is called Felix Felicis." Slughorn's smile broadened. "Better known as liquid luck. A very tricky and temperamental concoction, it has the power to grant the drinker success in whatever they undertake. This vial has enough for a full 12 hours of good luck, and it is the prize for today's lesson. I must warn you that it is a banned substance in all sporting activities, and should be taken sparingly. Too much and you will find yourself becoming dangerously overconfident, and if that occurs, even old Felix won't save you should you decide to fight a dragon, eh?" Slughorn laughed. And Daphne gave a quick grin to Harry had fought a dragon without the help of liquid luck, and come out all right in the end. "We have just enough time, I think, for you all to brew up the draught of living death. Whomever brews the best example, will win this vial to use however they like." "Begin," Slughorn said, and Harry had never seen such a rush to get started on assignment. Harry noticed Malfoy's intense look of concentration as he looked over his instructions. He idly wondered what Malfoy would use liquid luck for. Turning to his own book, Harry got down to business. The class remained very quiet of voices, as everyone was very focused on following the instructions carefully. The most difficult part seemed to be the cutting of Sopophorus beans, which proved to be tricky little devils. Once they'd been cut the first time, it got easier, but many people got hit by runaway beans. Glancing about as the class was nearly over, he saw that the best two were Hermione and Daphne. Daphne's potion looked nearly finished, and had a near-perfect lilac color as described in the book, while Hermione's was a bit darker. Harry had managed a light purple, and was quite proud of it, as if Snape had been teaching, Harry felt his potion would be black and quite thick. "Time's up!" Slughorn cried. He began walking past each table, and taking a look and a stir. Malfoy's potion was a dark lavender, and looked rather sludgy. Slughorn gave an approving nod of Harry's and stopped short with Daphne's. He continued on, and had to keep going back and forth between Daphne's and Hermione's. Finally, after several minutes, he declared Daphne the winner, and handed her the vial of liquid luck. "Congratulations, and 20 points to Slytherin," Slughorn said proudly. "Good job." Harry smiled at Daphne, who beamed. "I thought Hermione was going to win," Daphne said, looking to Hermione, who was smiling back. "You got your bean cut much sooner than I did. If I'd had a few more minutes, I might have had a better finished potion." "Thank you." Daphne smiled. "I don't know why, but I thought you'd be upset." "Nah." Hermione grinned. "Who needs luck when you've got brains?" Tracy sniggered, and after a moment, Daphne got the backhanded insult. "Hey." Draco was really angry. He had needed that potion. He wasn't so arrogant that he couldn't admit to himself that he needed a little help with his task. Thankfully, the potion would be close, and with a bit of help, he would be able to get his hands on it. He would need to wait a few days, and hope that Daphne didn't use it, or all of it, at any rate, and then he could get into the girls' dorm and steal it. Pansy would be most willing, and he could get a little something extra for his effort. Sure, he'd be breaking his vow, but he didn't have to shag her. She could use her mouth for something other than talking, after all. Once she finished him off, a quick stupefy, and then he could go through Greengrass trunk and get that lovely little vial, and maybe a memento. For now, he had to get up to the 7th floor to get a look at the broken cabinet at last. His master's instructions led him to a painting. A picture he knew quite well. It was across from the vanishing room that Potter had used to hold his illegal meetings the year before. Draco was still seething that Dumbledore's golden boy had somehow managed to escape punishment. It was obvious to him now that Umbridge had not been as capable as he'd believed. What other reason could there be for her getting the Dementor's kiss? Draco shook the thoughts away and began pacing back and forth in front of the portrait of the dancing trolls, concentrating on the room of lost things. Slowly, a door began to materialize, and Draco smiled. If the rest of this task proved to be this easy, Potter would be dead in a fortnight, and Daphne Greengrass would be under him, right where she belonged. Opening the door, Draco saw that the room was immense, far greater than the Great Hall. There were mountains of bric-a-brac. Books, fanged frisbees, empty fire whiskey bottles, things he'd never even dreamed he'd see in person. Draco thought he saw a pair of girls' underwear as he made his way into the labyrinth, searching for the cabinet. He made a note to look through the room at length and see if there were anything truly worth procuring for his own later. He found the cabinet after a quarter of an hour searching, just as his master had described it. It was very large, and intricately decorated. Draco opened the door and was surprised to see that it looked very dull on the inside, but then again, there was truly no reason for decoration inside, was there? He felt a strange sort of pull on his middle, as if the cabinet were trying to suck him inside. He arched an eyebrow at that, and wondered if that was one of the problems he would have to fix before it was useful once again. Draco closed the door, and pulled his wand. He'd read just about every book he could on repairing magical items, but as he'd been away from Hogwarts, he'd been unable to practice. It would have been his death if he'd received a notice from the Ministry about underage magic, especially with the Dark Lord ruling the manor. Now it was time to try his hand. Flicking his wand, he tried to run a diagnostic spell to find the source of the problem. The spell washed over the cabinet, but nothing happened. Draco knew he was supposed to see something that would tell him what he needed to concentrate on. Something would glow, or words would appear, but nothing happened. He tried the spell again with the same results. "Damn," he said, staring at the cabinet. He went to a nearby pile of refuse and picked up a stray sherry bottle, and opened the cabinet, setting the bottle inside. He shut the door, and heard a faint whoosh sound. Opening the door again, the bottle had vanished. He hoped that maybe the cabinet was not broken at all, that his master had been mistaken. If that were the case, Draco knew the bottle would return with a sign that his fellow Death Eaters had received it. After half an hour of waiting and half-interested browsing through the piles of discarded and lost items, he returned to check. Nothing. Draco tried several different spells on the cabinet, each more complicated and draining than the last, trying to discern the reason for the malfunction, but nothing came up. That is, until he performed a very difficult spell meant to detect magical blocks. Draco fell onto his rear end after casting the spell. He'd never even attempted anything so hard in all his life, and was surprised that he'd managed it correctly his first time. The cabinet glowed red for a moment before returning to its natural state. Draco fell back, sighing that he'd managed to discover what the actual problem was. Then the weight of the problem settled on him. A magical block would be quite difficult to remove, and worse, if his memory served him well, red meant multiple blocks. More than 10, to be precise. One block was difficult enough, as you had to discover exactly what was being blocked, and what spells were doing it. The problem was expounded by more blocks. If he'd taken ancient runes, he might have had an easier time. Some runes were good for detecting and even breaking such blocks, or so he'd heard. It was never more clear that he either had to get his hands on that luck potion, or learn to make his own. He now realized the true scope of his mission, and the Dark Lord was not a patient man. Draco would have to spare every moment he could to solving this riddle, as well as the second half of his task. Fortunately, things were already in motion to accomplish that. Sitting up, Draco felt thoroughly drained. That last spell had truly done a number on him. He got to his feet shakily, and decided to go down to the kitchens to get some food. Afterwards, he'd go to the library to look up luck potion, and detecting magical blocks. He took a few steps, before nearly falling over. Perhaps the research could wait for another day. Food, and then bed. After all, he needed to be at his best for when he finished off that old goat, Dumbledore, and claimed green grass for his own. Oh, how he would savor the image of Potter's face when he took her right in front of him, and made him watch. Draco felt a surge of energy as he left the room of lost things, and headed to the kitchens. He was getting closer to his victory, and it tasted so delicious. Please like and subscribe.